Welcome to the PCN Capital Preview. I'm Francine Schertzer, and today we'll talk about upcoming elections in Pennsylvania. But first, we're joined by Steve Ulrich, Managing Editor of Politics PA. Thanks for joining us.
Francine, thanks for having me this morning.
Despite being over a year away, you wrote that candidates running for the 8th congressional seat are already criticizing one another. For the benefit of our statewide audience, what should viewers know about this district?
The 8th congressional district is located in northeast Pennsylvania. It consists of Lackawanna, Wayne, Pike, most of Monroe counties, and freshman Rob Bresnahan won election November of 24, knocking off longtime Democratic incumbent Matt Cartwright. But the vote margin was just 6,000 votes. Bresnahan was able certainly to capitalize on the coattails of President Trump winning re-election. So now national Democrats, certainly Pennsylvania Democrats as well, have really targeted not only the 8th congressional district, but 3 other congressional districts in the Commonwealth as major targets in trying to win back majority control in the U.S. House of Representatives. So Democrats have tabbed Scranton Mayor Paige Cognetti as their candidate to challenge Bresnahan.
Now, as you noted, Scranton Mayor Paige Cognetti she's already announced for this race a little earlier this month. Meanwhile, she's also running for re-election. Does it help or hurt her candidacy that the announcement for Congress came out before the election for mayor has officially taken place?
That's a great question. I know a lot of candidates will wait until their upcoming race has already been determined. Cognetti, 45 years old, is running against Republican Trish Bainon, a 60-year-old, for the Scranton mayorship. But I think the pressures that circulate in terms of the national political scene, certainly her own political aspirations, I think factored in, and she felt the need to make the announcement, get out in front of any other potential challengers in the Democratic race. So Congressman Bresnahan has taken on the attacker role now, saying basically, where are Mayor Cognetti's priorities? Is it running for re-election and serving the people of Scranton, or is it really devoted to making a run toward Congress?
Paige Cognetti appeared on MSNBC last week criticizing incumbent Rob Bresnahan for breaking his ban on congressional stock trading. Are her concerns valid?
I believe they are. Bresnahan one of his campaign promises was certainly to eliminate congressional stock trading. Bresnahan has been brought up by numerous media outlets as one of the most prolific stock traders in Congress right now. Since he took office in January, he's made over 600 stock trades. Now, he will be upfront and say that it is not him making all the trades. He's turned his accounts over to an advisor to make all these deals. But still, it just kind of rings hollow based upon the fact that even after national stories ran on his trading history and some of his trades that seemingly have gone against priorities in the Commonwealth, that he has continued to do so. Now, in all fairness, since the middle of July, Bresnahan has made a grand total of 2 trades, so perhaps the message is getting through. But don't be surprised if you live in Northeast Pennsylvania that you're not inundated with these type of advertisements saying that Rob Bresnahan's been bad for Pennsylvania because of this activity.
Have you gotten any early indication, perhaps from readers, as to how a Cognetti-Bresnahan race would fare?
I think what we're going to look at, Francine, is the fact that 2026 is going to be a change election. Obviously, in off-year elections, the president's party usually takes a hit. And we have to look at the popularity of Donald Trump leading into summer of 26 to perhaps get a better indication. But certainly just the way that PA8 flipped in 2024, Democrats hold a 13,000 person voter registration in the area. So if Democrats return home to the party and they like what Paige Cognetti has done, as we said, Cognetti's young, 45. Bresnahan's younger, 35. So it's a change election in an area of the state where perhaps it's an older populace. So I think it will really be one of the most watched races, not only in Pennsylvania, but certainly around the country in 2026.
Steve Ehrlich, Managing Editor of Politics PA. Thanks for joining us this morning.
Francine, thank you.
More of the PCN Capital Preview after this short break. Welcome back. Our guests today are Mikus, Principal at Chartiers Group, and Mark Harris, Founding Partner at ColdSpark. Let's start by talking about next year's governor's race. This past weekend, the Republican State Committee endorsed Treasurer Stacey Garrity for governor. Let's take a look.
Now we will, with only one name put forward, we will move by voice vote. All in favor of endorsing Stacey Garrity as our candidate for governor in the 2026 election, please say aye. Aye. All opposed? The ayes have it, and Stacey Garrity has been endorsed as our candidate for governor. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our candidate, the next governor of Pennsylvania, Stacey Garrity.
Mark, we'll start with you. What does Stacey Garrity offer as a candidate?
Well, look, I think she's a proven statewide vote getter, and has shown the ability to, win in tough races. But, this is a new stage, and, we'll see how the campaign performs here. But, I think for Republicans, the desire is to try to avoid a messy primary and be able to have a candidate who can put forward, our message for the general election against, Josh Shapiro.
Mike, I'll bring you into the discussion as well. Do you think it was a good or bad idea for a state committee to make an endorsement this early on in the game?
I'm not sure if it makes sense for them to endorse somebody this early, but it's clear nobody else of note is planning on getting in the race. They may have done it to head off Doug Mastriano, who lost by a wide margin 3 years ago. I think Josh Shapiro is in a very strong position. He's led on just about every issue. His get F's done, getting stuff done has been his motto, and he's shown a propensity to do it. He's in very good shape for his reelection, so it makes sense for maybe them to get behind her this early to avoid any type of messy primary.
Regardless of which party we're talking about, what's the benefit of a state party endorsement?
Typically, it will provide resources. You can organize much easier when you have the backing of the party. Historically, though, party endorsements do not guarantee victory. Ironically, on the Democratic side, at one point a few years ago, it was more than half of people who got the Democratic endorsement actually lost the Democratic primary. Yeah. So I think in a lot of ways, it's a relic of the old politics, insiders deciding who the candidate should be. And, a lot of times voters reject that because, they'll make up their own mind.
Yeah, I think Mike makes a great point. Look, you have to combine it. If it's combined with other things, the reason I think, if we think back to, I think they're trying to model it off of what they did for McCormick. But the reason why the McCormick stuff worked wasn't just the endorsement. That was very helpful. But it was the fundraising, it was Dave's everything we were doing on the grassroots side, et cetera. Whereas you can go back in 2012 to, state party endorse, and I'm now blanking on the guy's name, for Senate, a candidate, and then Tom Smith from Western PA came out and spent, we spent $5 or $6 million and we won, and the endorsed candidate actually came in third in that race. So, look, I think it's a helpful one piece of the puzzle, but undoubtedly any candidate with the endorsement you cannot rely on the endorsement alone. If Doug Mastriano decides to run, he will undoubtedly be a very strong primary candidate. And, it's a money thing. I don't know. Mike would have a better idea than me, but Shapiro's going to walk into next year with $50-60 million in the bank. So, the biggest thing that concerns me as a Republican is access to resources. Dave McCormick got outspent last time, but we were able to raise enough to get our story out. I think the biggest challenge for Republicans here is going to be that resource question.
Some of the unions that endorsed Stacey Garrity and supported her campaigns for treasurer said that they will not support her run for governor. Will that have a significant impact in this race?
Do you want to handle this, Mark?
I think it's too early to tell. Stacey's got to get out there and, tell her story and build her coalition. It's undoubtedly true, that most of those folks are with Bob Casey last cycle. And so, it can be done, but certainly, politics is a game of addition, not subtraction. So you rather have support than not have support. And I think, Stacey's going to have to get out and make the case as to why she should be the candidate first in the primary election, and then obviously in the general.
The one thing I've also, in a state like Pennsylvania, if you run as a Democrat or as a Republican, you don't want to come across as the typical Democrat or typical Republican. So when a Republican's able to get endorsements of labor unions, which typically support Democrats, it's a compelling tool and can help you in your messaging saying, hey, I'm not your typical Republican. I reach across the aisle. Losing those endorsements or not getting them this time, I think just makes it a little bit harder for her to make that case.
How will Stacey Garrity's alliance with President Trump affect her campaign?
I think it is going to be an anchor. Donald Trump is extremely unpopular. Even Fox News recently released a poll showing he's underwater. He's unpopular on just about every issue that you test. I think, a lot like you've seen in the past, going back to even like 2010, during the midterm election, Barack Obama was an anchor around the necks of Democrats running, whether for governor or senator or Congress. And I think that dynamic plays out. It's historically what happens in midterm elections. I think, she has a very steep hill to climb, and Donald Trump's unpopularity at the moment will be, just add some weight to that anchor.
I'm probably unsurprisingly going to have to disagree pretty strongly on that one. I mean, look, Trump has won Pennsylvania twice. The voter registration numbers, Republicans are continuing to gain on voter registration every day. Every piece of data I've seen in the state is there's no indication that Trump is unpopular at all, in fact. And so, he is this is not 2017. 2018, that was a very different cycle. He is dramatically more popular than he was at that point. And so I absolutely believe that will not be the primary issue. Democrats may want it to be the primary issue. I get that. That's like how they're used to running campaigns. But the days of Trump as an anchor are long gone. Trump 2.0 is a very different, much more popular, much more adept politician. And so, I don't think Stacey's going to run away from him by any means. And I think it would be a mistake to do that.
Well, Mark is right. It is different. This isn't 2017. But what is different is the Republicans nationally have have enacted massive cuts to Medicaid. You're going to see millions of people lose their health insurance. Pennsylvanians are going to see higher costs when it comes to health care. And we have a stagnant economy. Jobs are not being created while inflation continues to skyrocket. So yes, it is much different than 2017. And I would argue that this year may actually be worse than 2018.
I'd like to.
I mean, certainly possible. We haven't seen that. There's no electoral evidence of that yet, but, we'll see. I do think if you're the Democratic incumbent governor, if the economy is as bad as you say it's going to be, that you're still the incumbent. You're going to own what happens. I just think that the economy will be. You're right. It will be a key issue. It will be litigated. But I think Republicans and Stacey Garrity or whoever the Republican nominee is will have a strong economic message to drive home as well.
It's going to be a challenging year. Typically, whoever occupies the White House, rightly or wrongly, gets the blame or the credit. If the economy's good, they get the credit. If the economy's bad, they get the blame. And right now, we are looking at a slowing economy. We are seeing inflation on the rise. Electricity costs are through the roof. The Republicans have proactively passed legislation to make healthcare less available to people. People are going to lose their health insurance. Those who are lucky enough to keep their health insurance are going to see the costs skyrocket. And there's only one party to blame in this case, and it's the Republican Party. And anybody running for office as a Republican is going to own that.
I'd like to reference an article that appeared in Political on September 11th. It noted Stacey Garrity announced that she would not support a state abortion ban if elected, despite previously backing anti-abortion legislation. She also stopped selling anti-abortion merchandise that was available on her prior campaign website. What do you make of these actions?
I think it's that she knows that being anti-abortion is an extremely unpopular position in Pennsylvania. Politically, it may be smart for her to try and change course on this issue. However, all of her statements, all of her positions, selling merchandise on her website, I think is still going to be used against her and used against her effectively. Pennsylvania voters, by and large, are pro-choice. They support a right of a woman to have access to abortion. And she's just on the wrong side of this issue, and she knows it. It may be smart politically and may help her on the margins by flip-flopping, but in the end, voters are going to know what her real record is.
I mean, look, I would just let the numbers do the talking. Every candidate who won statewide, a year ago is pro-life, right? And so, I don't think that there's any evidence electorally that Pennsylvania isn't willing to elect pro-life candidates who can articulate what their position is. And, certainly I know we dealt with this issue extensively in the Senate race. And, what we found there is a group, we think of abortion as a bimodal issue, sort of pro-life versus pro-choice, but the vast majority of Pennsylvanians sort of sit in the middle of that issue. And if you go out and you make the case about what your position is and you're clear what your position is, and it sounds like that's what, Stacey is working to do, you can win over those cases. Somewhat pro-choice voters, which is a huge portion of the Pennsylvania electorate, supported both Donald Trump and Dave McCormick and Stacey Garrity and Tim DeFore in the last election. So they've already voted for Stacey. I don't think there's any reason to believe that they're not willing to do that again.
Let's look at the other side of the ticket. Is Governor Josh Shapiro beatable?
Absolutely. I mean, he should have lost the AG race. I mean, if we had fun, I did Heather Heidelbaugh's race. If we were off the air almost all October. We almost beat him then. He is a paper tiger, and he's running for president. Everything is going to be about the presidential race, which is a huge vulnerability. The people of Pennsylvania want a governor who's going to be focused on being governor, not on Iowa and New Hampshire. And so, I do absolutely believe he's beatable. We need to run a strong candidate. We need to have the funding to tell that story. But if those things happen, I absolutely believe Josh Shapiro can be beat. Again, the voter registration data continues to run in our direction. And we've seen a clear pathway for Republicans to win statewide. We just need to go and do it again.
I think Governor Shapiro is in an extremely strong position for re-election. He's extremely popular across the spectrum. He actually has a pretty decent number of Republicans who approve of his job right now. Will they stay with him? We'll see. That's what elections are about. The biggest thing about Josh Shapiro is every time he's been tested, he's risen to the challenge. When we had I-95 collapsed, it got built in an amazing amount of time. It was back and up, and cars were moving across it quickly. That's when somebody is able to lead. And I think what voters look for more so than they look for, are you a Democrat? Are you a Republican? They look, are you able to get things done for me? And Josh Shapiro has shown that over and over and over. He has stood up for, whether it's abortion rights, whether it's, supporting construction jobs, whether it's growing our economy and focusing on everyday people's needs. What people want to know when they cast a vote are you working for me or are you working for somebody else? And, the Republicans are going to try and make this about some prospective race in 2028. And that's not what this race is going to be about. It's going to be about how people's lives are being addressed by the politicians in Harrisburg. While Josh Shapiro is taking on a do-nothing legislature, he is working to get stuff done. And I think the voters are going to reward him for that.
Does the ongoing budget impasse hurt the governor?
I don't think it does. I think it's clear he's been willing to go to the table and willing to work with Republicans on issues across the board. Right now, I would say the Republicans in the Senate who are blocking a budget from becoming law are making this about politics rather than about people. And I think the people of Pennsylvania are going to see that.
I mean, look, you can't have the benefits of incumbency without the downside. If you're responsible for the good things that are happening, you're going to be responsible for the bad things that are happening. And I think the governor has not shown nearly enough leadership on the budget, and it continues again to be something that voters care about. I mean, look, Shapiro is beholden to the far left of the party because he is running for president, and that is the wedge issue that Republicans are going to be pointing out, going to drive home, because it's just, that's the truth. He is thinking about where Iowa and New Hampshire Democratic voters are going to be, and they have gone so far left, and that really creates a wedge for him. And the Democratic Party, I mean, on major issues like Israel, is in an absolute civil war at this point. So Republicans are united. We're pushing forward, and we're absolutely going to do everything we can to make sure that voters have a real choice next November. As Mike said, absolutely right. There's a campaign in front of us. We need to run a good campaign. As a party, we need the strongest candidate. We need to be in that position to do that. But I do absolutely believe if we do that, we can beat Josh Shapiro.
Well, the interesting thing is, you talk about he's beholden to the far left of the party. He's the only candidate in this race who's been willing to stand up to the fringes of his party. Stacey Garrity went along with the lie that the 2020 election was stolen. She has towed the line on every single conspiracy out there. And I think the biggest difference between Josh Shapiro and Stacey Garrity is he's willing to do what he thinks is right, regardless of where his party is. And Stacey Garrity is just going to go along to get along and do whatever the far right wants. We've seen it. She's done it in office. He's been in office, and he's been willing to take on the fringes of the party.
Governor Shapiro appeared on Meet the Press this week. He charged that the Trump administration is trying to stifle dissent by wielding power to keep critics like late-night comedy host Jimmy Kimmel off the air. How big of an issue will free speech and public dissent be, not only in this particular race, but in the midterms in general?
I don't think we're allowed to talk about that. I kid. Look, I think it's, of all the issues, it's going to be out there. The people in the base are going to be jazzed by this, but I think the average voter is going to make their decision about, how expensive is their health care? Are their kids able to get a good education? Is the economy in a good place? Has inflation been brought under control? That's going to be the big issue. I mean, the Trump administration is going to do what they want to do. They're going to try and use the power of government to silence people, but I don't think it's going to have that big of an impact on the election.
Mark, what do you see as the most important issues?
Mike and I want to be clear. I don't agree with everything he just said, but I think we both agree that this is unlikely to be the determinant issue in the election. I do think the economy is the main driver, and a lot of this is the sort of noise of politics, particularly when we have two bases so sort of clearly engaged.
Come on, Mark, you agree with everything I said.
You know.
Well, let's shift our focus back to this year. This November's election will include 3 retention races for Pennsylvania Supreme Court justices. Why are these races important?
I mean, this is where the Supreme Court and then the lower appellate courts are very important. Republicans made a catastrophic mistake. What was it, 10 years ago or so, in losing these 3 races. I distinctly remember it was earlier in my career sitting in meetings begging people to fund these races that we could not afford to lose because they have consequences. And, I have a very low view of the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. I think court should be in quotes. They're not, they have clearly become a left-wing institution that has zero regard for the law. The redistricting case is a good example of this. And so, I'll be proudly voting no on all 3 of them. And, I hope that the majority of Pennsylvanians go ahead and do that as well.
I think it's incredibly important. The courts are always important, not just this year, every other year, but it tends to not get the attention that it deserves. You may not
We
find
can agree on that too.
you may find it hard to believe, but I disagree with what Mark Harris said about the current court. I think all you have to do is look at the U.S. Supreme Court, and the choice the voters have right now is: do they want a court that will make decisions based on the law and based on what's good for the people of Pennsylvania, or do you want a Supreme Court like the U.S. Supreme Court that will side against the people every single time, whether it's on the economy, whether it's on personal freedoms, whether it's on holding large corporations accountable? I think that the choice is clear. So I'm going to be voting yes to retain all these judges.
What are some of the more important issues or cases that have come before the state Supreme Court in recent years?
I think the most well known is the redistricting, when the Supreme Court undid the horrific gerrymandered maps that the Republicans put in place when they controlled all three branches here in Pennsylvania. I think that is the one issue that is driving Republican big secret money into this race to try and get these Supreme Court justices removed. They believe that a political party should be able to distort maps and distort the electorate so that the politicians are picking their voters rather than the voters picking their politicians. And I think that is probably the highest profile issue. There are other issues out there, but I think that by itself is what is driving all this special interest money from the Republican side into this race.
So certainly redistricting and the court throwing out, a long time jurisprudence around how the system, which is constitutionally laid out in the Pennsylvania Constitution, works, inventing politically beneficial things. I mean, I think the Republican criticism is essentially the judges are Democrats first and lawyers maybe fourth, fifth, sixth, or seventh, maybe 10th. I mean, again, I have so little respect for the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. They clearly are partisan Democrats first, foremost, and only. And, that is harmful to our state. It's harmful to the rule of law. I personally thought we should have impeached all the judges after this court, after that decision. I'd be glad to see them gone.
See, I think what Mark just said there. I think that's what's wrong with our politics. If you disagree with somebody, you should impeach them.
They ignored the law.
I think that's
the
one
Pennsylvania
reason
law
why.
is clear.
And I think that's one reason why that we need judges who are going to look at the law and make a decision, first off, what the law is, and being willing to take on powerful interests.
The power of redistricting is in the legislature.
And
they seized the power from the legislature.
The Republican Party decided to distort what it was meant to do for a partisan advantage. These maps have been fair. If they were truly partisan, we would have maps that are 10 seats for the Democrats and 6 or 7 seats for the Republicans. It is basically a 50-50 map in a 50-50 district or 50-50 state. Pennsylvania is a 50-50 state. And the Republicans try to draw maps to maximize what they can get. And look, both parties do it, but there have to be some constraints. And that's why the Supreme Court made a common sense decision to redraw the map, and the legislature had an unwillingness to draw new maps, which is why we ended up with the map that we have today.
There's no constitutional basis for them drawing maps. They invented it for their own partisan purposes, ignoring the law, ignoring case law, ignoring all the judicial background on this. And yeah, there should be consequences for seizing power in a democracy, which is exactly what Pennsylvania Supreme Court did.
Democrats
but
lost,
in the end,
if I may, Democrats lost 2
succeed.
congressional seats in 2024. What does that say about whether or not the seats were drawn partisanly?
Can you repeat that?
Democrats lost 2 congressional seats in the last race in 2024. So what does that say about whether or not the maps were drawn in a partisan manner?
Well, so what we're fighting about is the old maps. So that this happened, in before redistricting in 2022 or 2021. So this is what happened in the middle of last cycle, right? When Democrats realized that they needed to try to find more seats, and they put out a national call to do that, and the Pennsylvania Supreme Court obliged them to. So again, my issue is you want to change the way we draw maps. We have a process for that. You amend the Constitution. You do not use the Supreme Court as a political cudgel, and that's exactly what the Democrats did, and there should be a price for that.
I think what this is sour grapes. Look, where we are right now, this map that we have now is very close to what we had prior, obviously minus one seat. Um, and what you saw is in a year that's good for Republicans, Democrats are going to pick up some seats. In a year that's good for Republicans, they'll pick up seats. If it's good for Democrats, they'll pick up seats. This is a 50-50 state, and our map should reflect that. What it was. We can relitigate what happened in leading up to the 28 election. But in the end, the map became more fair for the people of Pennsylvania and more representative of who we are as a state. And that's a 50-50 state. And that's, the map should reflect that.
Let's give our guests a break while we look at what's coming up on PCN. At the Pennsylvania Press Club luncheon, the guest this week will be Aaron Chapin, president of the Pennsylvania State Education Association. That airs today live at 12:30. On tomorrow's Capitol Preview, we'll explore the overdue state budget with Mark Singal, former Pennsylvania Lieutenant Governor, and Jay Corman, former Senate President Pro Tem, also partner at OnePlus Strategies. They join us Tuesday morning live at 9 a.m. On the Issues will be about public transit funding with Representative Malcolm Kenyatta. He'll be here Wednesday at 7:30 p.m. And then right after that, we'll have Attorney General Dave Sunday. He joins us Wednesday night at 8. Now, onto the history and culture side of programming, we'll have a show about the Ladies Association of Philadelphia. They were a pioneering group that wanted to do their part for the Revolutionary War. That's on Tuesday night at 8 o'clock. The Lads of Swampoodle is brought to you by American Veterans Media. We'll have that for you Sunday at 3 p.m. BA Books will have author and former Senator Mike Stack discussing this book, City of Brotherly Blood. That's Sunday night at 7 o'clock. The public affairs coverage you watch on PCN TV is now free online. Check out our streaming service at PCNselect.com. PCN is Everything Pennsylvania. We're a 501c3 nonprofit television network that relies on viewers like you. To make a donation, visit PCNTV.com. Now let's get back into our discussion, previewing both this year and next year's elections. Mark, you referenced Republicans closing the gap on Democrats in voter registration. What do you think is responsible for that shift?
I mean, surprisingly, from my perspective, young people, it is, something that if you had told me early in my career, that Republicans would be winning young men, I would have thought that is kind of crazy. But that's what's happening. And in fact, last week, whether it was related to the assassination of Charlie Kirk or not, I don't know, but Republicans saw a massive uptick in registration. We'll see what happens in the numbers that post today. But I think Republicans have a good job reaching out and getting voters excited about the Republican Party and bringing new people into the tent. It's about addition, not subtraction. I remember when Republicans were down over 1 million votes. So for us to be on the verge of being the plurality party in Pennsylvania is like quite a sea change. But we got to keep working. And obviously Pennsylvania is still a very purple, as Mike said, 50-50 state. Registration is not determinative of everything, but I'd rather be the party gaining votes than losing votes. But we got to go out and work hard.
I think there are a number of factors driving it. As Mark said, the Republican Party has worked very hard and been very well organized in terms of registering people. And in particular, there have been a number of counties that were ancestrally Democrat. Places out here in the West, like Washington County, Fayette County, Greene County, Cambria County. A lot of these counties are driving that surge, where they have been voting Republican for quite some time, especially in federal races, and it has in recent years translated to state races. A lot of those people who remained registered Democrats but were voting Republican have begun to take the steps of having their registration match their voting patterns. The second thing is I personally think the Democratic Party has been terrible in terms of organizing and investing in voter registration. I think when we hit that $1 million or million voter advantage 10, 12 years ago, whatever it was, we got fat and lazy, and we stopped organizing the way we should. We stopped investing in registering at the grassroots level. I think so. I think those are the two biggest factors that have contributed to this change in registration. That said, as Mark said, we probably still have a number of people in the Philadelphia and Pittsburgh suburbs who are still registered Republican that are voting Democrat. So what I would encourage the state Democratic Party to do and the National Democratic Party to invest in a voter registration drive here in Pennsylvania, and not just for 2 months, not for 3 months. It should be an ongoing, everyday program that the Democratic Party's doing. But the problem is they haven't, and it's time for them to start doing it. And if these numbers don't wake up the people who are leading our party, nothing will.
And I certainly hope they don't listen to Mike. But yeah, I mean, look, we've made a long-term investment in this, for years and years on the Republican side, and I think it is paying off. But to Mike's point, it is. I mean, I remember doing Toomey in 2010. We were getting like 15% of Democrats. McCormick didn't get 15% of Democrats in this cycle, and it's just because a big chunk of those 15% of Ds who voted for Toomey in 10 switched and are Rs now, right? And so you have a better alignment. Mike's right, you have a better alignment. But again, as I said, registration may be a lagging indicator, but I'd rather be gaining in it than losing it. And I know we're going to continue to invest in expanding our party and trying to bring as many folks into the pool as possible.
Is voter registration a strong indicator of who voters will select at the polls?
Anymore, yes.
Much more now than
90% plus. I mean, this wasn't true even 10 years ago, but yeah, 90% plus of partisan registrants will tend to vote for, unless a Doug Mastriano or whatever, right? But if you have a normally, sort of good Republican candidate or Democratic candidate, they'll capture the vast majority of their partisan base.
I would agree with that, but we're starting to see more and more people disaffiliate from a party. And that's not just true here in Pennsylvania. That's true across the country. And, I think one of the biggest things that vexes our party, man, you may see the same thing in your party, Mark, the hard left, the people who are very, very progressive, refuse to acknowledge that here in Pennsylvania there are swing voters who one election they may go straight ticket Republican, then the next election go straight ticket Democrat, or in the same election vote for just as many Democrats as they vote for Republicans. And ultimately, you need a strong registration effort to build your party. But in the end, it's going to be those swing voters. The people that are independent, who or with a minor party, who are going to determine who wins or loses an election.
Absolutely right. I mean, I always say to folks, tell me what indies do in an election, I'll tell you who wins. Right? I've never been involved in a swing district election where you've lost independents and you have still won. So they are very important. They are a growing force. As people disaffiliate, per Mike's point. And yeah, I mean, I've always said, I think one of the things I've been frustrated with Republicans about, and I've said a lot, is we can't abandon the suburbs. Yes, that they're not as good as they used to be for us, but we cannot, there's too many votes in Allegheny and Bucks and Montgomery and Chester, and we have to do well. And I think one of the things, if you look back, actually, Trump did about the same in the rural areas, if not a hair worse in a place or two in 24 versus 20, but he made big gains in actually the city of Philadelphia, as well as a lot of the suburban areas. He still lost, but in reducing the margins. And I think Mike's absolutely right. Those are swing voters that the Republican both parties have to make sure that they get, and they are ultimately the determiners of who wins these elections.
And conversely, I encourage any Democrat running statewide to go to Greene County, to go to Cambria County, to go to these rural counties. Again, you may not win them, but if you reduce the margins, I always say in Pennsylvania, small things can have really big impacts in determining who wins an election. And being comfortable, and this is why I think Josh Shapiro has been so successful, is he's willing to go to areas that are not typically friendly to Democrats. He may not win them, but he's closing the gap. And you do that across the state of Pennsylvania, those numbers add up and could be a determining factor on whether or not you win.
What
I
do
mean,
you think?
I was in Cambria County right after the end of the last election was while they were dealing with their ballot issues. And, they were recreating the ballots, so they had to read out sort of everyone. And it was amazing. The Democrats won a state house seat there that's like Trump plus 30 or whatever. And, it's a good example of something great, that the Democrats ran. They had a strong incumbent. They ran a great campaign. They won that seat. And, huge numbers of people were still willing to split their ticket when given a compelling reason to do so. And I think as campaign practitioners on either side, it's a good reminder of that importance.
Right. And generally, and Mark has said this a number of times, politics is a game of addition, not subtraction. And I think any party that wants to be competitive, especially in a state like Pennsylvania, is that you can't avoid any area of the state. And you have to be willing to go and speak to voters who may not agree with you on every single issue. Because you never know what that issue will be that is driving them to make their decision on who they will vote for.
Obviously things have gotten a little complicated with Fetterman after he won, but I think if we just looked at the Fetterman 22 campaign, honestly, I think that was very impressive to me, is that he did take the sort of fight to the rurals, to the Republican areas, and he succeeded. I mean, he still lost those, but he succeeded in shrinking Republican margins, and certainly that Fetterman model, again, it's a little different now, but
Yeah.
that is concerning. That was definitely concerning to me and was in the back of my head all through McCormick 24, is I could not let Casey go out and do a similar maneuver. And so I think Mike's absolutely right about that.
There have been legislative attempts to open Pennsylvania's primary elections. There's also a King's Bench petition before the appellate courts to consider whether our primary system is constitutional or not. How would that dynamic change if our primaries were open to independent voters?
I mean, I think it would help. Oh, stop. Sorry, Mike, you could go.
No, you go. You're first.
Yeah.
I've been going first a lot. So
No. Look, I think it would help expand the electorate. The truth in Pennsylvania currently is still, it's unlikely that a huge percentage of independents would choose to vote in a primary, but it would create a new block of voters that are a little less ideologically driven. And so, full disclosure, I've done work on this issue for some clients promoting the ability for independents to vote in primaries, but I do think it would be very helpful to increase. I think just general increased participation in primaries is helpful for everyone, because I think that leads to the party nominating the strongest general election candidate, which should in large part be the purpose of primaries from my perspective.
I think what would happen is you would see, candidates who more center left or center right winning their primaries, rather than someone hard on the left, someone hard on the right. As the partisan in me says, well, look, I'm a Democrat, I'm active in the Democratic Party. Why should somebody who's not willing to join the Democratic Party have a say in a primary? But that said, it would increase participation, and it would also, as Mark said, create a block of voters that could, allow center left or center right candidates become more competitive in some of these primaries.
Before we run out of time, I want to talk just briefly back at the midterms, and particularly our congressional races. What congressional seats are each of your parties targeting in 26? Or I'm sorry, in 26, that's correct.
Right now, I think we have a very good shot in the first congressional district, which is the Bucks County seat, the 7th, which is in the Lehigh Valley, the 8th district, which is in the northeastern corner. The incumbent, Rob Bresnahan, has got some serious issues regarding stock trading. And then you have the 10th district in the Harrisburg area, central part of the state. None of them are slam dunk wins for Democrats, but all four of them are in play. The first may be the hardest. Brian Fitzpatrick, was very smart when he voted against the Republican bill that would slash Medicaid and kick people off their health insurance to pay for tax cuts for the wealthy, but he's the only one. These are going to be hard fought races. These districts always seem to be close. And, a lot of it will be determined on, what is the political environment come fall of 2028.
Yeah, I mean, obviously Republicans had a great year, so we're mostly on defense. I mean, I believe we're going to have a very strong candidate in the 17th in Allegheny County, which is the sort of only at this point marginal seat. It's a sort of definitely a lean Dem seat. It'd be a tough race, but I think we're going to have a strong candidate there. But yeah, I think Mike's right. Those 4 seats are absolutely, going to see a lot of action. I expect that the television stations of Pennsylvania will win out again in a lot of advertising, but voters once again will get to go to the polls and pick their elected representatives, which is an amazing part of American democracy.
Will this year's general election give you an indication of what things might look like in the midterms?
I kind of think anymore you mean the 25 elections into
Correct,
26?
yep.
Sorry. A little bit, yeah. I mean, I think I think you will get somewhat of a preview. Honestly, New Jersey and Virginia may be better indications necessarily than the Pennsylvania Supreme Court race will be, but Republicans, I think will have some sense. But again, if we think back, we thought Republicans had a great 21. Almost won in New Jersey, won in Virginia, did well here in Pennsylvania. And then 22 is just kind of electorally. So, we still are a long way from home. So it'll give us some insight, but not much, I would say, probably.
I think it'll give us enough insight as parties, the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. Well, they'll be able to look at the results and figure out what some of their challenges may be and what tweaks to their strategy for 2028 they'll make. The biggest thing, like, for example, on the Republican side, they've historically had a problem since Donald Trump's come around. When he's not on the ballot, it's hard to get some of their voters out. There are some people that they'll show up if Donald Trump's on the ballot, but not. And then on the Democratic side, we always have the issue where, in the city of Philadelphia and in the city of Pittsburgh is energizing turnout. So we're going to have a picture of, what work lies ahead for 2028.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I do. If there's one thing, I mean, if I have one county I worry about as a Republican, it's Allegheny. If I have one county I worry about as a Democrat, it's Philadelphia. And so this will give us some insight on, can Republicans stop the bleeding in Allegheny, which has been very problematic the last few years, and can Democrats stop the bleeding in Philadelphia? So I definitely agree. It'll give us some real tangible insight into those 2 very important counties.
I'd like to thank my guests, Mike Mikus, principal at Chartiers Group, and Mark Harris, founding partner at ColdSpark. Thank you both for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We recently spoke with Cindy Dunn, Pennsylvania's Secretary of Conservation and Natural Resources, about the increase of visits to state park campsites.
Cindy Dunn, PA Secretary of Conservation and Natural Resources. There's news about the popularity of camping at Pennsylvania's state parks. Tell us what's happening.
Well, we're still open. We're still awesome. We are getting a lot of camping. Camping got higher during the COVID pandemic, and it's stayed up. People bought the equipment. They love it. They make memorable times with family and friends outdoors. We have a lot of camping in Pennsylvania, especially the state parks, 124 state parks, 2.2 million acres of forest land where there's campsites in the forest. There's 7,100 campsites to be reserved in our system.
What effect did the president's spending cuts have on the federal campgrounds? Let's consider them for a minute.
Well, Raystown is a huge Army Corps of Engineers federal campground, and it was closed down because of the spending cuts and the fact that they couldn't staff up to run such a big campground. And we immediately saw a big uptick in state park reservations. Near the site of Southwest PA or in South Central PA, we saw a big uptick, 60% in the state parks, somewhat near the federal sites. Overall, 10% across the whole state. Keeping in mind that some of them weren't even near federal sites. But in the summer, we saw 30% increase across state park reservations for camping alone. And of course, all other forms of recreation as well. But camping's one that's easy to measure because we get reservations.
When the president announced those spending cuts for federal campgrounds, did you immediately recognize that was an opportunity that Pennsylvania had to step up its awareness?
Absolutely, because we don't want people to lose the habit of spending time outdoors. That's a habit that we want to keep people in, and we got new people jumping into camping over the COVID pandemic. We certainly didn't want to lose that, and we wanted them to stay in Pennsylvania. You know, Governor Josh Shapiro is really promoting Pennsylvania as a great American getaway. There's people coming into Pennsylvania from surrounding states. We want to keep that going, right? So we knew we had to step up and host more, and so we responded. We put the word out there. We really challenged ourselves to provide those services and opportunities for people that want to stay outdoors, want to camp. And so we did. And I'm really proud of the staff for really leaning in and stepping up and giving so many families and people and groups of friends like a memorable summer. And really, summer, as you know, is continuing in Pennsylvania. We're still seeing summer activities throughout the parks. We're still seeing people, coming outdoors, paddling, staying at the beaches. And very soon, we'll be shifting to leaf peeping. We call it leaf peeping, but people traveling to see Pennsylvania's incredible leaf show.
Madam Secretary, about how much money has been generated for Pennsylvania by this increased activity at state parks?
You know, we're the main the main base layer for all outdoor recreation in Pennsylvania. And what we've learned is that recreation in Pennsylvania, outdoor recreation in Pennsylvania, is a $19 billion industry. It's much bigger than most people really assumed. And it leads across the system to 168,000 jobs. So outdoor recreation across Pennsylvania is big. And, that makes sense when you think about it. We're an outdoor state. We've always been a state with a lot of hunters, anglers, paddlers, hikers. We have a culture of outdoors. We have the state that's good for it. We have mountains. We have more river miles than almost any state except Alaska. So we've got the right state for the outdoors, and it's one of our big, unique assets. And the state parks and the state forests are really the first layer in for most people to enjoy the outdoors. And of course, we count on that mosaic of other offerings like the national parks and the federal Allegheny National Forest. We count on the national monuments and the national trails like the Appalachian Trail. And also the local parks. A lot of our counties and municipalities have parks, and we're able to grant support them. We give them grants to help with the trails and with the facilities. So this mosaic of state, federal, local is really important. But I think for a lot of people, when they think camping, they're really thinking of a state park.
Are you able to say what the effects are on the local economy when people choose to stay at state campgrounds?
Yeah, it's huge. When you think about the state parks, you see like little mom and pop stores, gas stations, kind of near the park. There's a tremendous benefit in having those services to people in the parks, using the parks, but it helps the local folks as well. So that little store is there and can be there for their milk and eggs and bread on their way home from work, in November, December. But because they're there, because they're getting a lot of business during the summer months from the state park visitors. And we just see many, many examples with AI these days. You can do a focused study on who's going where and buying what, right? It's a little bit spooky, but one of our partners in York County did a study on the Gifford Pinchot State Park campground, big campground, very popular. Like how many people were leaving that campground to go to a local ice cream shop. And it was mind-bending. I mean, I didn't know people ate so much ice cream. But then if you look at their basic ice cream offering, like $3.50 for a small, and magnify that by the number of trips from the campground, it was like mind-bending. So these businesses around parks are really benefiting, and that's great because that not only helps the visitor, but that helps all the locals.
We have just less than a minute left. Let's talk about the kind of investment that Governor Josh Shapiro has made in outdoor recreation. Try to tell me about what you think he's accomplished overall.
Well, I'll tell you what, from the day he came in, he understood the value of outdoor recreation. I think harkening back to his time as a Montgomery County Commissioner, where he was actually actively building trails and parks, he understood the value, not just economically, but socially and outdoor recreation. He and his family use the outdoors. They've first governor to camp in a state park. He dedicated $112 million for additional amenities and infrastructure repairs to our state park system in a second year in the job. He launched an outdoor recreation office and now an outdoor business alliance to really bolster this part of Pennsylvania's living and economy. And he also recognizes a social value. So when people see each other in parks, that divisiveness evaporates. People are people. They're enjoying a picnic with their kids, or they're helping each other on a trail, like if a bike tire goes flat. So it's just one of those places in the landscape where people come together, and it knits society together at a time where we need it so desperately.
Cindy Dunn, PA Secretary of Conservation and Natural Resources, thank you for your time.
Thank you. Get out there and enjoy it.
That concludes today's show. The PCN Capital Preview returns tomorrow to discuss the state budget impasse with former Pennsylvania Lieutenant Governor Mark Singal and former PA Senate President Pro Tem Jake Corman. That's tomorrow live at 9 a.m. I'm Francine Schertzer. Thank you for watching.